All right. Hello, everyone. It's Rolf from Waves and Positions. I got another article for you guys, and this is one of my favorite ones. This last week, gotten some pretty good articles going, and this is one of my favorite ones. Everybody should know this info. And I got these lovely ladies over here that are helping me out today. But so this is going to be the lie that built the South. And I made a couple notes on Substack where, if you've ever noticed that people from the American South are a certain way, we really need to be aware of the abuse that both the white poor people and the black poor people have endured for a long, long time. And this article kind of explains how that all happened, it's pretty messed up. But anyone who's from like the West Coast or the Northeast Coast or even the Midwest probably just doesn't even understand the abuse that the people of the South have endured. And so this is what this article is about. The lie that built the South, how a tiny oligarchy enslaved millions, exported their souls to England, and used fear of Haiti to build the most sophisticated propaganda machine in American history. They never taught you this in school, and that was the whole point. Okay. Jefferson Davis spent 3 years and 1,500 pages defending a civilization. Now, Jefferson Davis, if you don't know, he was the only president of the Confederate States of America. He marshaled constitutional law, revolutionary precedent, and the finest rhetoric the 19th century could produce. He interviewed surviving generals. He corresponded with statesmen. He wrote, he rewrote, and argued with his publisher until the day he died. And not once in 1,500 pages did he explain why a 7-year-old blonde girl with blue eyes was sold at auction in New Orleans. That omission is the whole story. Here we go. Part 1. The civilization that wasn't. Here is what Jefferson Davis, the only president of the Confederate States from 1861 to 1865, called a civilization. 3% of white Southern families owned more than 50 slaves. 2/3 of white Southern households owned none at all. There were more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi River Valley by 1860 than anywhere else in the United States. And yet the South had virtually no cities, no manufacturing base, no public university system worth mentioning, and a white illiteracy rate that historians have since concluded was not accidental. That's what most people, I'm going to go off topic here for a second. Most people don't realize what the whole point of the Civil War was. It wasn't because of slavery exactly. It was because this extraction culture that they had created, they weren't building cities. They weren't building universities. They weren't building out the infrastructure that you need to survive. They just had one thing where they were creating cotton for the English monarchy and their clothing mills. All right, where was I? Oh yeah. So, and yet the South had virtually no cities, no manufacturing base, no public university system worth mentioning, and a white illiteracy rate that historians have since concluded was not accidental. It was policy. Academic research has established that the planter class deliberately withheld education from the white majority, not from indifference, but from calculation. An educated poor white was a dangerous poor white, one who might ask why he was dying in a war to protect the property of men who owned him economically, just as surely as they owned the people in the fields. The South was not a civilization. It was a supply chain. Raw cotton to Liverpool, raw cotton to Manchester. 80% of Britain's textile raw materials came from American slave labor. By 1860, cotton textiles accounted for 40% of all British exports, employed between 1/5 and 1/4 of the entire British population, and absorbed close to half of all invested British capital. The antebellum South was not an independent republic of honorable agrarians. It was a wholly owned extraction colony operated by hereditary management class, producing raw material for British industrial capital at the lowest possible cost, which was the cost of human slavery. Jefferson Davis knew this. He tried to use it as a weapon. His entire diplomatic strategy was built on threatening to cut off Britain's cotton supply and watch the industrial north of England collapse into revolution. It didn't work. We're talking about human beings here. And the British, some of them are a little more educated. The Lancashire mill workers, starving and unemployed because of the Confederate cotton embargo, voted in December 1862 to support the Union of the United States of America. They would rather be poor, they said, than support a nation built on slavery. Their employers had a different answer entirely. When the cotton stopped flowing and the mills went quiet, British industry did not sit idle. Liverpool shipyards built the Confederate Navy almost from scratch. You know those ironclad things you learn about in 5th grade? Built by the British. British manufacturers sold 500,000 firearms to the Confederacy and 400,000 to the Union simultaneously. By Gettysburg, 85% of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia carried a British Enfield rifle. Confederate purchasing agents sourced 90% of Southern shoulder arms with British suppliers before 1863. General Grant captured a Confederate artillery ammunition box at Petersburg stamped Royal Arsenal Woolwich. Britain never officially entered the war. It didn't need to. It was already in it from both directions. At a profit. The workers on the factory floor chose conscience. The industrialists above them chose cash. Britain did both at once and called it neutrality. Part 2, what Haiti taught them. This is going to blow your mind, okay? Here's the thing. So most people don't realize Haiti, it's like a disaster today. But back in the day before Napoleon's time, it was the highest producing colony. Like England just was beside themselves. Like France was making so much money. It was the highest producing colony in the entire Americas was Haiti. Like all of the sugar, all of the coffee, everything was coming from Haiti. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Part 2, what Haiti taught them. Here is the thing about the Haitian Revolution that Southern planters could never stop thinking about. It worked. It worked. In 1791, on the island of Saint-Domingue, which is what Haiti was called before it became independent. It was called the island of Saint-Domingue. The most profitable colony in the Americas, 500,000 enslaved people rose against their masters. They killed them, burned their plantations, defeated the French army, defeated the British army, defeated Napoleon's expeditionary force of 20,000 soldiers, and in 1804 declared the first free black republic in the history of the world. Yeah, but they're going to pay for it later. It's just, man, it's amazing they're able to do that. The governor of South Carolina, now we're back in America, back in the colonies. Well, no, it's actually America already. Sorry, 1791. The governor of South Carolina wrote to George Washington the week the revolt began. And I quote, "The conditions here," he said, "are nearly similar." Referring to Haiti, what happened in Haiti. And he was not wrong. And the planter class spent the next 60 years building a counterinsurgency system to make sure what happened in Haiti never happened in Carolina. This is where you find out. This is why the South is so backward. It's because of the Haitian Revolution and what happened, what they did to try to stop that in America. Okay, here we go. They read the Haitian Revolution like a military after-action report. They diagnosed exactly what had made it possible. Toussaint Louverture, which I probably killed his name there, French name, The revolution's greatest general, he was one of the slaves. So he taught himself to read and write specifically because he knew that without literacy, he could not communicate, coordinate, or command. He used the skill to organize across plantations, draft orders, correspond with foreign governments, and run circles around every European general sent against him. So the planter class banned literacy, not as cruelty, it was as a strategy. They studied the bois caman ceremony. Bois caman, probably said it wrong, it's French ceremony, the voodoo religious gathering where the revolution was organized, and concluded that any unsupervised assembly of enslaved people was an existential security threat. So they banned gatherings, banned drumming, banned black-led churches, banned anything that could function as a communication network. They looked at the African-born slaves in Saint-Domingue who had maintained enough cultural cohesion to organize across language and tribe and coordinate a mass uprising. So they deliberately scrambled American slave populations, mixing people from different origins on the same plantation, separating family members, selling people away from their communities. This was like on purpose. They sent like slaves from the north down to the south, mixed them all up so they didn't know each other. Selling people away from their communities. The domestic slave trade that moved over 1 million people from the upper South to the deep South between 1820 and 1860 was partly economic, but it was also a counterintelligence operation. Now, separating people from their families, their languages, their tribal connections, and their communities was not an accidental byproduct of the slave market. It was a feature. A person who does not know anyone around them cannot organize with them. A person who's been sold away from everyone who loved them and dropped into a plantation full of strangers speaking different dialects has to start over socially from zero. The planter class understood that solidarity requires familiarity, that rebellion requires trust, and that trust requires time. So they made sure that time was never available. Every sale, every forced relocation, every family separation reset the clock on any potential organizing capacity. Haiti had shown what happened when enslaved people were allowed to develop deep communal bonds across years and generations. The domestic slave trade was the systematic prevention of exactly that. And then there's the 1808 ban on importing African slaves. Wait till you wrap your head around this one. American history has largely allowed this to be remembered as an early step towards abolition. Yeah, we've been no more slaves from Africa. You know, we're good people. It was not. Let me repeat that. It was not an early step towards abolition. It was a counterinsurgency decision made by men who owned human beings and intended to keep owning them. So African-born slaves in Saint-Domingue had retained enough cultural memory, communal identity, and organizational capacity to coordinate a revolution that killed an army. American planters looked at the outcome and concluded that a slave population born in America, speaking only English, with no memory of Africa, no tribal networks, and no knowledge of any other world, would be harder to organize and easier to control. Cutting off the African supply was not humanitarianism. It was threat reduction. The domestic slave trade replaced importation immediately, and they did not stop acquiring human beings. They just stopped acquiring ones who remembered what freedom looked like. Every measure they took came directly from the Haitian playbook, and every measure made the underlying system more violent, more rigid, and more unstable. Because you cannot solve the problem of slavery by making slavery more sophisticated. You can only delay the reckoning. Part 3, the white slaves nobody counted. Now we arrive at the part that was the most carefully buried. This is gonna, don't tell the 15% of blonde hair, blue-eyed white people in the South that their great-great-grandmother was a slave. Okay, here we go. This is gonna blow everyone's mind. And before, I'll probably tell the story after. Let me get through this chapter, and then I'll tell the story because I have firsthand witnessing of this kind of thing. So by 1860, the official census counted roughly 10% of enslaved people as mulatto, meaning visibly mixed race. The real number was almost certainly 2 to 3 times higher. Census enumerators were instructed to classify people as mulatto only if they appeared clearly mixed. And the incentive to misclassify ran in one direction only. Lighter meant harder to keep, harder to justify, harder to sell without someone in the North raising an obligation. But there, this is kind of before photographs. So unless you were there, you're not going to know that this guy looked like a white person. The genetics are not complicated. A woman who is half black and half white, impregnated by a white man, can produce children across the full range of European phenotype expression. Blonde hair, blue eyes, skin indistinguishable from free white children in any northern city. And under the doctrine of partus sequitur vetrium, a Latin legal phrase meaning the child follows the condition of the mother, it did not matter what the child looked like. If your mother was enslaved, you were enslaved at birth for life. No court and no amount of obvious European ancestry could change that. The law was not about appearance. It was about ownership. And ownership passed through the mother like an inheritance, except the child inherited chains instead of property. It took 2 constitutional amendments to kill this doctrine. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, abolished slavery entirely. The 14th Amendment, ratified in July 1868, established that all persons born in the United States are citizens at birth, regardless of the condition of their mother, regardless of the color of their skin, and regardless of who owned their parents. The 2 sentences of those 2 sentences of constitutional law, 2 sentences of constitutional law to dismantle 2 centuries of inherited bondage. And, I'm originally from California. California did not ratify the 14th Amendment, not until like the 1960s, because they didn't want Chinese people to vote. I mean, that's pretty messed up, man. The Chinese, that's another article, were the slaves of the West Coast. So just to let you know, California's got plenty of skeletons in the closet as well. But I just feel bad for the South because they were abused way more than anyone. So anyways, let's see, here we are. Fourth, yeah, so 2 sentences of constitutional law to dismantle 2 centuries of inherited bondage. Now, I can tell a quick story. I'll tell a really quick story here before I get back to the article, but I have a cousin who is white, first cousin. She married a guy who's half Indian, like his dad is from India and mom is from Scotland. So he's half Indian, half Scottish. My cousin is just 100% white, first cousin. They have 4 kids, okay? 2 of the kids look like 50% him, 50% her. 1 kid is like dark, like looks 100% Indian, from India. Then the 4th one has red hair, blue eyes, and the fairest skin you've ever seen. And this came from the same 2 people. So that's what I'm saying, where I have witnessed what this article is talking about. You get 2 people having babies and the genes mix up whenever you have a child. Like, it's every single time. It's part of what makes evolution work, is the different gene types are thrown out and mixed up, and that helps with adaptation to the environment. But anyways, it just blows your mind that these 4 kids, 2 of them look like they came from them. 2 of them look like they probably had completely different parents, but same mom and dad. Well, anyways, here we go. There are runaway slave advertisements from Georgia in 1857 describing a 12-year-old boy named Walter as someone who will no doubt endeavor to pass for a white boy. A 1770 Maryland advertisement describes a light mulatto man who may easily pass for a white man. An 1864 Harper's Weekly photograph circulated by abolitionists specifically for its shock value shows children recently liberated from New Orleans slavery. One is a girl named Rosina Downs, not quite 7 years old, blonde, silky hair, not the slightest visible trace of African ancestry, enslaved from birth. A pamphlet from 1855 estimated there were 1.5 million enslaved women in the South, with, quote, some of them without even a tinge of African blood. Their white children would also be slaves. This was not a marginal phenomenon. Modern DNA analysis confirms the scale. Contemporary African Americans carry an average 24% European DNA. Almost all of it entered the African American gene pool before the Civil War, when the vast majority of Black Americans were enslaved in the South. The mixing was not happening post-emancipation. It was happening under the whip. And the 23andMe data, which is, you spit into this thing, send it away, and it figures out who your ancestors are. So the 23andMe data tells the other half of the story. Among white Americans today who consider themselves entirely European ancestry in the South, between 3 and 4% carry, this is for the entire United States, between 3 and 4% carry detectable African DNA from an ancestor approximately 200 years ago. Now, in South Carolina, that number is 13%. So 13% of the total white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people have African DNA. In Louisiana, 12%. In Georgia and Alabama, 9%. These are people that you would never think were part African. But the 23andMe DNA doesn't lie. And those are only the people whose African ancestry is still detectable after 6 or more generations of dilution. 6 or more generations of dilution. Everyone who passes white in the 1840s and 50s and successfully married into white families and never told their children is now completely invisible. So you can just imagine a kid comes out blonde-haired and blue-eyed like this girl. Wasn't there, but you might bring them into the house and you just call them, that's one of your daughters. I wasn't there. I don't know. But this part of the history is not well documented, but you can't deny DNA results. All right. So the white South was, to a degree, that would have been destabilizing if widely understood, already substantially integrated, just invisibly, just against the will of everyone involved, just through a system of sexual coercion and legal classification that turned the children of the most powerful men in America into property. Jefferson Davis never wrote a word about this either. 1,500 pages, never mentioned it. Part 4, the book that proves the point by what it leaves out. The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government is 1,500 pages of the most sophisticated apologetics the 19th century produced. Davis argues constitutional law with genuine rigor. He marshals founding era precedent. He distinguishes secession from nullification, sovereignty from rebellion, and constitutional compact from nationalist consolidation. Some of his legal arguments are not trivial. Serious scholars still engage in them. And then he explains that slavery was good for Black people, that enslaved people were content in their condition, that the institution had civilized them in the arts of peace, order, and civilization. I mean, this could probably be turned into some kind of a comedy. The man who wrote the most elaborate constitutional defense of state sovereignty in American history could not bring himself to explain why an 8-year-old boy named Charles Taylor with fair complexion and silky hair was sold twice before anyone thought to photograph him. That gap between the sophistication of the legal argument and the moral vacancy of the human reality is not incidental. It is the whole structure of the book. Davis built 1,500 pages of intellectual architecture specifically to prevent the reader from arriving at the obvious question. Who was being protected? Like, who was this book about? Not the poor white farmer who owned no slaves, not the enslaved people who had built the entire economy, not the mixed race children of planter class men who were themselves sold at auction by their fathers. Sorry, I know you're my son, but I'm going to sell you. So 3% of white families, the ones who owned more than 50 slaves, the ones who controlled state legislature and congressional delegations and newspaper editorial boards, the ones who had constructed over 2 centuries the most successful propaganda operation in American history, a system so total it convinced poor whites to die defending a social order that kept them illiterate and landless. A system so refined it convinced an entire nation that a constitutional argument about state sovereignty was the real reason 620,000 people died. It wasn't. Part 5. What power actually looks like when it tells the truth. Here's the uplifting part, and it is genuinely uplifting. Every single control mechanism the planters class built eventually failed. Humans will overcome. Everyone failed. The literacy ban produced Nat Turner. Nat Turner was an enslaved black preacher in Southampton County, Virginia, who in August 1831 led the deadliest slave rebellion in American history. He and a small group of followers killed 57 white men, women, and children across 11 farms in a single night before being captured by militia forces. Turner himself hid in the woods for 6 weeks before being caught, tried, and executed. But what made Turner uniquely terrifying to the planter class was not just the violence, it was his profile. He was deeply literate, intensely religious, self-educated, and widely respected among enslaved people in his community. He had taught himself to read, studied the Bible obsessively, and believed he had received divine visions calling him to lead his people to freedom. He was exactly the kind of person the system was supposed to make impossible. His rebellion triggered a wave of repressive legislation across the entire South. Virginia and other states dramatically tightened anti-literacy laws, banned black-led church gatherings, expanded slave patrols, and made manumission significantly harder. The direct line from Nat Turner to those laws is why he matters so much to the article's argument. The planter class looked at Turner, saw the proof of their worst Haiti-derived fear. A literate, religiously organized, charismatic leader could emerge from within the enslaved population, and the entire system could unravel. Then the Atlantic slave trade ban produced a domestically born enslaved population with American identities and American grievances and American determination that turned out to be just as dangerous as the African-born population they had feared. The destruction of cultural cohesion produced new American cultural forms in music and religion and community that proved indestructible. The attempt to prevent a Haitian-style coalition between free colored people and enslaved people produced exactly that coalition in the Union Army, where almost 200,000 black soldiers fought and defeated the Confederacy. The Lancashire mill workers who chose poverty over supporting slavery were not naive. They were strategically brilliant. They understood that the short-term pain of the cotton famine was less dangerous than the long-term normalization of a slave economy at the center of global capitalism. They chose correctly. Britain did not intervene. The Confederacy collapsed. Jefferson Davis's book sold 22,000 copies and never came close to matching the commercial success of Ulysses S. Grant's personal memoirs. Published the same decade, Grant's book sold by the hundreds of thousands. People wanted the truth. They always want the truth. Eventually, even when the lie has had a 200-year head start, the most powerful lesson from this entire story is not about slavery or the Civil War. It is about information architecture. The planter class understood instinctively what modern social scientists now document rigorously. Control the information environment and you control the behavior of the population. Ban literacy, suppress assembly, destroy cultural memory. Construct an ideology that makes the people you are exploiting feel invested in the system that exploits them. It works for a while, and then someone teaches themselves to read, and someone else carries news across the water. And the people with the most reason to understand the truth, the people for whom the truth is survival itself, put the pieces together faster than any surveillance system can track. The system that tried to suppress black literacy produced Frederick Douglass. The system that tried to break cultural cohesion produced the blues, then jazz, then every dominant form of American music for the next century. The system that tried to prevent another Haiti produced the Civil War, which ended slavery entirely. You cannot build a sustainable civilization on a lie about who the people in it actually are. Eventually, the genetics catch up. Eventually, the DNA testing happens. Eventually, someone photographs a blonde 7-year-old girl who was property and publishes it in Harper's Weekly. And the audience in the North looks at Rosina Downs and cannot, for the first time, look away. Truth has terrible patience. The takeaway that actually applies to your life. All right, so what does all this mean for today? Every institution built on information suppression eventually fails when the information cost of maintaining the suppression exceeds the cost of the truth. This is not just a history lesson. It is a systems principle. The planter class failed not because they were outgunned, though eventually they were. They failed because the cognitive overhead of maintaining the lie kept expanding. More laws needed to classify people. More patrols needed to control movement. More elaborate ideology needed to explain why this was all fine and constitutional. The system became progressively more brittle the more sophisticated it became, because every new adaptation to a new threat required a new layer of suppression. And every layer created new pressure points. I mean, any institution you encounter in business, in politics, in culture, that is building more elaborate systems to prevent people from accessing or sharing information is telling you something very specific about what it fears. The sophistication of the suppression is a map of the threat. And any institution that is building genuine capacity, educating its people, increasing their access to information, tolerating the discomfort of honest disagreement, is doing something much harder and much more durable. It is building something that does not require constant maintenance to survive contact with reality. The Confederacy spent enormous energy trying to prevent a second Haiti and created the conditions for something worse. From the planners' perspective, a war that ended the entire system. They would have been better served to build an economy that did not require enslavement of human beings, but that would have required 3% to share. But that would have required the 3% to share. They chose not to. The rest is 620,000 graves. Let's choose differently. Okay, final word. We're getting there. Almost done. Thank you for sticking around if you did this long. You just traveled through one of the most suppressed stories in American history. Not suppressed with malice anymore, just with the quiet inertia of what gets left out of the curriculum, what gets summarized as states' rights, what gets turned into a monument and left unexamined at the courthouse square. You now know what Jefferson Davis knew and refused to say. You know what the planter class learned from Haiti and built into law. You know whose children were being sold and why the census counted them the way it did and what the DNA confirms today. This knowledge is not comfortable, but it is clarifying. The thing about understanding how power actually works, how information gets controlled, how populations get managed, is that once you see the architecture, you cannot unsee it. You start asking different questions, not what does the official version say, but what would the official version need to leave out to hold together? That question is not cynicism. That question is intelligence. The mill workers in Lancashire, England, asked it. The enslaved people who taught themselves to read in violation of the law asked it. Ulysses S. Grant, who outsold Jefferson Davis by a factor of 10. He wrote a book that asked it on every page. History rewards the people who refuse to be managed. You are one of those people now. Now go find out what else the 1,500-page version left out. All right, everybody. Hey, I'm Rolf from Waves and Positions, and if you like this or want to learn something, I mean, if I can just inspire one person to do great things, this is all worth it. I'm here just to give people the knowledge to find the best version of themselves. And I will see you on the next one. Thank you.